Jason Chandler sat on the couch, glued to his phone, when his wife Karen, whom he had been married to for nearly 10 years, called with unsettling news. Earlier, a private investigator had uncovered Karen's betrayal. She and her lover were on their way to Honolulu, a stark contrast to her claims. Jason couldn't help but reflect on his own naivety. He had spent a decade dedicated to their relationship, and now it was shattered by her lies. Taking a sip of coffee, he leaned back, his mind racing as he thought about their history. They had met in college 13 years ago, both pursuing business degrees. Their romance had blossomed, leading to marriage after graduation. Jason had joined his father's tire business, working his way up to head the accounting department, hoping one day to inherit the company and succeed Mike Allen, the retiring CFO. Meanwhile, Karen had ventured into real estate and excelled even in tough market conditions. Together, they lived comfortably, with a nice house and new cars, seemingly secure in their marriage. They had no children, which Jason initially considered a blessing. Karen had mentioned fertility issues and had opted for a tubal ligation, even though Jason suggested adoption. She had declined. Recently, however, her frequent social outings had raised Jason's suspicions. She returned home late more often, and when he expressed his concerns, she dismissed them, saying it was just work stress. One night, as she came home looking disheveled with the smell of cigarettes clinging to her clothes, Jason confronted her. "What were you doing out so late?" he asked. She defensively replied, "Just hanging out, having a few drinks. It's my business, Jace. I can take care of myself." Jason was taken aback by her tone, which was a far cry from her usual demeanor. Seeing his reaction, she softened. "I'm sorry, Jace," she apologized. "It's just work stress." Jason pointed out, "You've handled market pressures before without this. What's changed?" Karen sighed, explaining, "It's tougher than ever out there. The competition's fierce, and the pressure's relentless." Jason tried to reassure her, "I get it, but don't take it out on me." She hugged him, expressing regret. "You're right, dear. I'm sorry." He agreed but asked, "Please freshen up. You reek of smoke." "Apologies," she conceded, heading for the shower. By the time she joined him in bed, Jason had already fallen asleep. Over time, their intimacy began to fade. What was once several times a week turned into barely once a fortnight. Karen's interest in his life seemed to dwindle, and Jason noticed more and more blatant lies. For instance, she claimed to be at the office when she wasn't. Despite his suspicions, he refrained from confronting her, knowing how explosive her reaction could be. Lying awake beside her one night, Jason couldn't shake the worry that something deeper was wrong. He gazed at her, troubled, and she noticed. "What's on your mind, Jace?" she asked. "I'm worried," he confessed. "About what?" she probed. "Us," he admitted. "It feels like we're growing apart. Do you still love me?" Karen quickly reassured him. "Of course, sweetheart. You know that, right?" Jason hesitated, then said, "I honestly don't know. It's been a while since you said it, and our closeness is dwindling. You're out more than you're home." Karen apologized, explaining, "Work's been overwhelming. I do love you, Jace. Please trust me." Jason asked, "Can you show me more?" "Of course, baby," she replied, kissing him. They made love that night, temporarily soothing Jason's worries, but the concerns still lingered. A month passed, and the cycle repeated itself. Jason's suspicions deepened. One day, his friend Ron urgently called to meet. "Sure, let's grab a beer," Jason agreed. Ron insisted he couldn't explain over the phone, so they met at the bar. There, Ron dropped a bombshell. "I saw your wife today," Ron said. Jason shrugged it off. "Yeah, she's in real estate, showing houses." "I know," Ron affirmed, "but I never knew real estate involved such closeness." Jason frowned, confused. "Seriously? You're kidding." "I wish I were," Ron said, his voice serious. "I saw Karen with another man, holding hands and kissing. It wasn't innocent." Jason was in disbelief. "That can't be right," he protested. "Are you sure it was Karen?" Ron pulled out his phone and showed him a photo. Jason's heart sank as he saw the evidence confirming his worst fears. "Damn," he muttered, feeling the weight of the betrayal. "Can you send me that?" he asked. "Sure thing," Ron said, sending over the picture. Jason stared at it, his mind racing. What's your plan? Ron asked. I'm at a loss, Jason admitted, the weight of the situation pressing down on him. This blindsided me. Ron, his friend, could see the confusion and pain in his eyes. My friend's a PI, Ron offered. Want me to connect you? Please do, Jason requested, his voice full of urgency. I need answers. After parting ways with Ron, Jason headed home, determined to confront Karen. When he walked through the door, he was surprised to find her home early. You're back early, he remarked, trying to sound casual. Just in time, she smiled. Where were you? He asked. Having a drink with Ron, she replied, looking at him with a small, innocent smile. Jason raised an eyebrow. Everything okay with your friend? Not really, Jason shared, his tone serious. My wife's been unfaithful. Karen feigned innocence, her expression unreadable. Oh, she said, acting surprised. Jason's voice was heavy with disbelief. Yeah, he replied, his heart sinking. It's a nightmare. Karen's reaction didn't escape his notice. It wasn't just a feigned shock. It felt rehearsed, as though she had prepared for this moment. It would crush me if you ever betrayed me, he remarked, studying her carefully. He noticed a subtle flinch in her eyes. She quickly masked it, embracing him tightly. I'd never betray you, she assured him. I love you too much. Jason held her for a moment longer, but something still felt off. Glad to hear it, he replied, his lips pressing against hers. What brings you home early? He asked, trying to shift the conversation. Our company's convention starts this weekend, she explained. I wanted to pack early and spend some time with you before we're apart. Where's it held? He asked, keeping his voice steady. Las Vegas, she answered. At the Westgate Resort Hotel. When do you leave? He pressed. Friday, after lunch, she said, almost nonchalantly. Another award this year? Jason asked, aware of her success in her career. I suppose, she answered, her tone evasive. They kissed again, but Jason couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. How about we celebrate our anniversary in Vegas? He suggested, hoping to spend time with her in a way that might bring them closer. I can't, she declined. I have work commitments. Disheartened, Jason agreed to celebrate later. The next day, after some thought, Jason reached out to Ron for a recommendation for a private investigator. Before lunch, he met with the investigator in his cluttered office. Good morning, Mr. Chandler. The investigator greeted him with a handshake. Glad to meet you. Call me Jerry. What's the deal? Jason asked, jumping right into the conversation. He briefed Jerry on Karen's trip to Las Vegas, telling him his suspicions about her behavior. Vegas, huh? Jerry mused, leaning back in his chair. You think she's up to something there? Could be, Jason admitted, his voice tight with uncertainty. I've got contacts there who owe me favors, Jerry offered, his voice lowering to a confidential tone. We can keep tabs on her, set up surveillance if you give me a room number. It'll cost extra, though. Expect that. I expected as much, Jason nodded. But I need to know the truth. Jerry handed him a digital audio recorder. This is easy to use. Just slip it under her car seat. It's voice-activated. Retrieve it later. She usually parks at the airport, Jason noted. Perfect, Jerry said with a nod. We can handle it. If she slips up, we'll know. Jerry then handed Jason a private line for updates. Thanks, Jason said, taking the number and writing a check from his personal account, not the joint one they shared. They had separate personal accounts, each contributing up to 10% of their earnings. Jason usually spent his on clothes and gifts for Karen, though he had been saving for a cruise. That night, Karen packed for her trip, and Jason offered to help. As he noticed her excessive luggage, curiosity got the better of him. He peeked inside and found birth control pills, despite her previous claim of having a tubal ligation. He snapped a photo of her belongings, making note of the revealing club attire and bikinis, including a tiny, open micro bikini he had never seen her wear. Feeling a knot in his stomach, Jason discreetly placed the audio recorder under her car seat, ensuring it was activated before locking up. As he did so, He couldn't help but wonder if this was the last time he would ever feel close to her. The next morning, Karen shared her hotel room number with Jason, promising to call him nightly. "Love you," she said, kissing him before she left. "Love you too," Jason replied, watching her drive off. At work, he immediately called Jerry to update him on Karen's room number. "Got it," Jerry acknowledged. "Thanks." Later that day, Karen called him from the airport. "Hey, just got here," she informed him. "Thanks for telling me," Jason replied, trying to keep his tone neutral. "Just settling in," she continued, unaware of the growing doubt inside him. "I'll call you tonight," Karen said, ending the conversation with a quick, "Love you." "Love you too," Jason replied, his voice flat. Once he was alone at home, he immediately activated the audio recorder, hoping to hear nothing incriminating, though part of him braced for the worst. At first, there was nothing more than road noise and faint static from her radio. But then, halfway through, reality hit him like a punch to the gut. Through his Bluetooth earphones, he could hear a man's voice greet Karen. "Hello, Stallion," he said. "Hey, Stud Muffin," Karen flirted back, a giggle escaping her lips. Jason scoffed internally, disgusted. "Who's this clown?" he muttered under his breath. The man continued, "Last week was amazing. Glad you enjoyed it," Karen giggled. "Plans for next week already arranged?" he asked. "Of course," she replied casually. "Did you tell your husband?" the man inquired. "Not yet," Karen admitted. "I've got it handled." "Does he suspect anything?" the man pressed. "Nothing," Karen assured him. "He's clueless." Jason's stomach churned. "Hope you're right," the man said. "He won't believe anything," Karen boasted, her confidence dripping from her words. "Okay," the man conceded. "See you at the hotel tonight?" "Okay, can't wait," Karen responded. "Bye, love," she said sweetly before hanging up. Jason stared at the recorder, stunned by what he had just heard. His mind raced as he replayed the recording to make sure he hadn't misinterpreted anything. He hadn't just caught her cheating. She had plans for their anniversary week that didn't involve him at all. Frustrated, he cursed under his breath. How long had this affair been going on? And who was the man she was seeing? Grabbing a beer, he sat at his desk, his mind reeling. Had he overlooked obvious signs? What else was she hiding? Jason had always respected Karen's privacy, but now, betrayal drove him to investigate further. He knew where she kept the key to her office, an old jewelry box. He grabbed it and headed to the spare bedroom. There, he accessed the desk, feeling the weight of his actions but unable to stop himself. What he uncovered shocked him to his core. Karen had deceived him throughout their marriage. In her personal account, there was over $250,000, far exceeding their agreed-upon savings limit. As Jason examined her expenses, his suspicions grew. Lavish gifts, including a pricey men's Rolex watch, likely for her lover, jumped out at him. Her spending also revealed expensive clothing, and he found multiple visits to Planned Parenthood, all paid for in cash. His mind spun as he wondered about the paternity of the terminated pregnancies and the ongoing use of birth control over the years. There was more. A receipt for Plan B pills, purchased just days earlier, caught his eye. And then, a recent receipt for a hefty down payment on an apartment in an affluent neighborhood made Jason's blood run cold. Was this place her love nest? Or perhaps an exit strategy? Other receipts showed payments for utilities and new furniture, making Jason wonder if one of the keys he had found was for her new place. Determined to investigate further, Jason powered up her computer and found her passwords conveniently listed beneath the keyboard. With a shaking hand, he logged into her email account, his heart racing. To his surprise, her credentials were saved, showing just how confident she was in her secrecy. What he found next made him sick to his stomach. Karen had been in constant communication with Greg Wilson, detailing their sexual encounters over nearly a year, starting from hotel rooms to later meeting at houses she was selling. One email from 6 months ago provided the answers Jason had been searching for. "Did you handle that little issue?" Greg inquired. "Yep," Karen replied. "I went and had an abortion today." "Shame you didn't keep the baby," Greg remarked. "You could have passed it off as Jason's." "I can't do that," Karen explained. "He thinks I can't conceive. He'd figure out it wasn't his. Jason's chest tightened as he realized that this was when he first caught her lying. Damn, he muttered to himself. She's a deceitful, cheating woman. As he continued to scroll through the emails, Greg had suggested they make love in Karen's marital bed, but she had refused. I won't betray Jason like that, she wrote. That idiot has no clue, she added. Jason's hands clenched into fists as he read more. Greg proposed. What if you had your own place? You could afford it with your earnings, and your husband would be clueless. Karen's response was chilling. Maybe you're onto something. I have my own account, and Jason never questions it. I'll start looking. 3 months had passed since that email. The down payment receipt Jason had found was just over a month old. I got a condo, Karen had told Greg. I put down the payment, and I'm getting furniture next week. Jason's oblivious, Greg replied. Perfect. Jason was stunned by this revelation. He scrolled through more of their emails. Why stay with your husband? Greg asked. Why not leave and get your own place? Believe it or not, I care for him, Karen responded. He may be a cocky accountant at a tire store chain, but I have feelings for him, and he treats me right. I got the condo so we could meet without risking exposure at hotels. Plus, you're still married. Hey, just give the word, and we'll be together, Greg added. Jason's mind was spinning as he read through the final exchanges. This was no longer just an affair. It was a carefully planned deception. His wife's betrayal was far deeper than he could have ever imagined. I'll dump Chris, Greg offered over the phone. A headache. Let's see after the conference, Karen replied, clearly unaware of the storm brewing on the other side of the line. Jason clenched his fists as he heard their conversation play out, his anger simmering beneath the surface. As Karen's words echoed in his ears, Jason began printing out the letters and receipts he had uncovered. He was determined to get to the bottom of everything, leaving no stone unturned. Just as he was deep in his work, Karen's number flashed across his phone. He answered cautiously, his heart pounding. Hello? He greeted, trying to keep his voice neutral. It's me, baby. Karen's voice floated through the line. Are you okay? You sound off. Jason hesitated, not wanting to tip her off. Got a pounding headache, he lied, masking the fury in his chest. Just settling in for the night, he added. She responded with her usual sweetness. Take something for that headache and rest. Love you and miss you. Yeah, same here, he muttered, his words feeling empty as he ended the call. He wondered if Karen had noticed his lack of affection. Was she too preoccupied with her lies to see the truth in his voice? His mind was racing. Determined to uncover the truth about Greg, Jason started scouring Karen's company website. It didn't take long before he found Greg Wilson, her boss, listed as the regional manager. A sickening feeling crept over him. His wife had been involved with Greg all along. He printed the page and added it to the growing pile of evidence in front of him. His anger deepened as he considered what to do next. Jason began contemplating drastic measures. He could break into her apartment and find more evidence. After all, he knew where she kept the key. The thought of violating her privacy stung, but the betrayal gnawed at him. He hesitated, unsure whether the apartment would have a security system. As he reviewed her documents, he spotted a code labeled Alarm System. Of course, she'd write it down, he thought bitterly. Determined to proceed, he closed the laptop, grabbed latex gloves from the garage, and set off to investigate further. Upon reaching her apartment complex, he parked in her designated spot and approached her door. Slipping on the gloves, he inserted the key from her jewelry box into the lock. The door clicked open, and he entered quietly. He quickly spotted the alarm remote and entered the code he had found. The system disarmed with a soft beep. Inside the apartment, Jason switched on the lights, surveying the place. The decor was elegant. Karen had always had good taste. Shame her loyalty doesn't match her decor preferences, he muttered bitterly. As expected, there were no pictures of him or any evidence of their life together. This apartment was clearly her escape from their marriage, a secret haven for her and Greg. In the kitchen, Jason noted a few plates and utensils, but the fridge was empty and the pantry was bare. Odd, he thought, that she would live in such a well-furnished place with so little to actually make it feel like a home. He admired the flower portraits on the walls, the large flat-screen TV. Everything was perfectly placed, but it all felt like a stage set for deception. Entering the bedroom, Jason felt a stab of pain as he saw the lace curtains cascading elegantly over the windows, just above the electric heater. The room was tastefully decorated, but there were no traces of him, no reminders of their life together. As he opened the drawers, he found unfamiliar underwear, and his suspicions grew. The presence of men's undergarments confirmed his worst fears. Greg had been here. Jason snapped photos of the evidence, his heart heavy. In the nightstand drawer, he found a card from Greg. "Thanks for the watch," it read. "Looking forward to your housewarming. Love, Greg." Anger surged through Jason. He imagined confronting Greg, but he quickly pushed the thought aside. He wasn't sure if that would help at all. Further inspection revealed more clothing, both male and female, filling the closet, as well as 2 toothbrushes by the sink and his and hers towels neatly arranged next to the shower. His mind was reeling. This wasn't just an affair. It was a full-blown betrayal, and it was happening under his nose. Jason snapped a few more photos and moved to the second bedroom. The room was sparsely furnished, with only a small desk and chair. He noted the network cable on the desk, likely for her laptop. Amid the letters addressed to Karen from utility companies, he made sure her name and address were visible in the pictures. The lace curtains in this room matched those in the bedroom, and once again, he noticed the electric heater and several fire hazards, particularly the absence of smoke detectors in the bedrooms and the one outdated detector in the kitchen. Jason wondered if it even had a battery. He took pictures of everything, knowing it would all play a part in the bigger picture. Once he confirmed everything was as he had found it, Jason turned off the lights, activated the security system, and locked the door behind him. As he walked back to his car, his mind was made up. Divorce was inevitable. Even if Karen severed ties with Greg and abandoned the apartment, Jason couldn't trust her again. He needed to consult a lawyer before moving forward. He hoped Karen's higher income would spare him from alimony, and he certainly wasn't planning to surrender their home or divide its sale proceeds. He felt abandoned by her secret apartment purchase, and the absence of children meant custody and support were no longer issues. But he wanted retribution. For all the betrayal, he needed justice. Back at home, Jason searched the phone book for Gregory Wilson's number, hoping to find the right one. When he found it, he hesitated for only a moment before dialing. "Wilson residence," a woman's voice answered. "Is this Mrs. Wilson?" Jason asked, his voice steady but laced with anger. "Yes, it is," she replied. "Who am I speaking with?" she asked. "Jason Chandler," he introduced himself, his pulse quickening. "Your husband is the regional manager for Acme Real Estate." "Yes, he is," she replied. "But he's away at a conference this weekend and will be visiting other offices next week. You'll need to call the regional office and leave a message for him there." Jason didn't hesitate. "Actually, Mrs. Wilson, it's you I'd like to speak with." She responded with a brief, "Oh?" "Yes, ma'am," Jason continued. "I hate to break this to you, but my wife is having an affair with your husband." "Are you certain?" she asked, the disbelief clear in her voice. "Are you certain?" Christy asked, her voice tinged with disbelief. "Absolutely," Jason asserted, his tone unwavering. "And I can provide evidence." "Do you have solid proof?" she pressed. "I can even show you where they meet up, if you'd like," Jason offered, his confidence growing. He heard a long sigh from Christy through the phone. "Would tomorrow work for you?" she proposed. "Certainly," Jason replied, his mind already planning the next steps. "What time suits you best?" she asked. "Around 1 o'clock in the afternoon," she suggested. Jason nodded, despite her being on the other end of the line. "I'll see you then," he confirmed before ending the call with a grin. Approaching his desk, he began drafting a to-do list. First on the agenda, change the door locks at Karen's place to ensure they were replaced before meeting Greg's wife. The temptation to drown his frustration in alcohol briefly flashed in his mind, but he pushed it aside, opting instead for a cold slice of pizza. As he chewed, he mulled over his options. Satisfied with his preparations, he ascended the stairs to his bedroom and retired for the night, feeling a mix of exhaustion and anticipation for the next day. Early the next morning, Jason made his way to the hardware store, purchasing supplies to replace the locks and create an extra key for Karen's apartment. By noon, he had replaced all the locks. After a quick shower, he grabbed his audio recorder and the printed emails from Karen's account, heading out to her apartment to meet Christy. As he approached the complex, he spotted Karen's car and noticed a Toyota Corolla nearby, where an attractive, dark-haired woman sat. He approached the window and knocked gently. "Are you Christy Wilson?" he asked, and the woman confirmed her identity with a nod. Jason opened the door for her, extending his hand. "Call me Jason Chandler," he said, offering her the latex gloves he had brought along. "Let's head in. I'll show you their hideaway." Using the spare key, he unlocked the door and deactivated the security alarm. As they entered, Jason led her into the bedroom, opening drawers to reveal Greg's clothes in the closet. "Oh my God!" Christy exclaimed, her eyes widening. "I've been searching for these for weeks. I wondered where his clothes were disappearing to." Jason pressed further. "Has your husband been sporting a Rolex watch lately?" he asked. Christy nodded, mentioning that it had been a gift from management. Jason retrieved the card from Karen's nightstand and handed it to her. "Is that his handwriting?" he asked, as she read the note and burst into tears. "I'm sorry," Jason said softly, stepping forward to embrace her, though he too was fighting back his emotions. "It's not your fault," Christy sobbed. "I suspected something, but I had no proof." As she composed herself, she faced him. "So, what's the plan?" she asked, her voice steady despite her tears. "I'm filing for divorce," Jason declared, his tone firm, "and I'll kick him out as soon as I lay eyes on him." Christy's face brightened at the idea. "I have an idea," she said with a spark of determination. "What if we help them move in together here?" Jason thought for a moment, then smiled. "I like it," he agreed, "but we need to act fast." He paused, recalling the recorded conversation. "Greg said he'd be away for a week after the convention," Christy revealed. "I bet Karen will find a reason to leave too." Jason cursed under his breath. "Damn, you're right," he admitted. "But I want her stuff out of my house pronto." Christy agreed. "Meet me back here in 3 hours," she said, standing up. "Sounds good," Jason replied. "I'll bag her stuff. Should be back in time." They parted ways, and Jason couldn't help but notice how petite and charming Christy was. As they left the condo, he felt a strange connection to her. 3 hours later, they returned to the apartment, their cars brimming with bags filled with Karen and Greg's belongings. They dumped the bags into the sparsely furnished second bedroom, not worried about breakage, knowing it would take the cheating spouse's hours to sort through everything. "I don't know about you, but I wasn't too careful with his stuff," Christy remarked with a sly smile. Jason chuckled. "Same here," he admitted, sharing a high five with her. "I don't know about you, but I'm famished." "Me too," she agreed. "I could really go for a juicy hamburger. A big, cheesy one." "Sounds perfect," Jason replied with a grin. "I know just the spot. Care to join me? My treat." "Lead the way," Christy responded. They headed towards the bar Jason frequented with Ron, and once inside, she eyed the building skeptically. "A bar?" she questioned. "Trust me," Jason reassured her. "They serve the best burgers here. You'll love it." "Okay," Christy acquiesced, but added, "I hope you're not planning to ply me with booze and take advantage." Jason chuckled, shaking his head. "As tempting as that sounds, I wouldn't do that," he quipped. "Darn," Christy joked, laughing along with him. Inside the bar, they ordered beers, burgers, and fries, exchanging stories about their failed marriages. Their experiences were surprisingly similar. Both had met their spouses in college, married quickly, but their desires for children had diverged over time. Jason asked if she was a CPA, to which Christy replied no but expressed hope to pursue it someday. Jason shared his professional background and mentioned the opportunities in his field. "Maybe we can help each other out," he suggested. "If you give me your resume, I can certainly put in a good word." "I can certainly do that, Mr. Chandler," she replied, taking a bite of her burger just as Jason's phone buzzed. It was Karen's caller ID flashing on the screen. He answered in a neutral tone. "Hello?" "Hey, baby," Karen's voice came through, slurred from alcohol. "What are you up to?" "Just grabbing a burger at the bar," Jason replied, keeping his tone casual. "What's going on with you?" "Guess what?" Karen blurted out, clearly excited. "I won the Best Salesman Award," Karen announced, her voice full of pride and excitement. Jason barely had time to process the news before she continued. "And they want me to stay in Vegas next week to work with their agents." Jason's heart sank. He had already figured out that it was another lie. "That's great news," he said flatly, his voice betraying none of the anger bubbling inside him. Karen didn't seem to notice his lack of enthusiasm. "I know it's short notice, but I really have to stay. I'm sorry about our anniversary this Wednesday," she apologized quickly. "Maybe we can celebrate next weekend?" Jason fought to keep his voice steady. "No worries," he said, trying to sound understanding. "I get it. I know how important your work is. I wouldn't want you to miss out on a big opportunity." "What's that supposed to mean?" she asked, sounding a bit defensive. "Nothing," Jason brushed it off. "Just that our 10-year anniversary only happens once, but I know your job matters to you. Don't stress about it." "Yes, work matters, but I thought you'd be happy for me," she added, her tone more upbeat. "I am," Jason insisted, his words coming out with forced sincerity. "Go work with your agents. I'll be fine." "I love you," she said, ending the conversation with her usual sweetness. "Good," Jason replied, his voice devoid of emotion. "Me too. Bye." He ended the call, his heart heavy with disappointment. Turning to Christy, he muttered, "That's that." Christy shook her head sympathetically. "She picked Greg over your anniversary," she remarked, her hand gently resting on his. Jason fought back tears, feeling the sting of betrayal. A man he barely knew, Greg, seemed to care more about his wife than she ever had. "What a disappointment," he muttered. "I'm sorry," Christy offered quietly. "Thanks," Jason managed to say, attempting a weak smile. He picked up Jerry's card and dialed the private number, his thoughts racing. "Jerry," Jason greeted when the older man picked up. "Jason Chandler here," he continued. "Just spoke to Karen, and she claims she'll be in Vegas for another week." "I don't buy it." "Not for a second," Jerry confirmed. "I was just working on your report, but I'll have my guys surveil them and see what unfolds." The conference wrapped up a couple of hours ago, and they're apparently enjoying themselves. Most attendees will be heading home tomorrow. Jason felt a jolt of anger run through him as Jerry continued, "Oh, and your wife and her lover spent last night together. I've got footage you might want to see. I'll email it to you, included in my report." "That'd be great, Jerry," Jason acknowledged, his voice tight with suppressed rage. "Thanks." After ending the call, he turned to Christy. "Tomorrow, we'll get to the bottom of this. My PI caught those two lovebirds spending the night together. He's sending over some video footage. Would you care to watch it with me?" Christy hesitated. "Not particularly," she admitted, but then softened. "But I feel like I should." Jason nodded understandingly. "Well, let's head to my place," he suggested. After settling the bill at the bar, they left and headed to Jason's house. Once there, they settled in his office, and the video arrived in his email. "Would you like a drink before we start?" he asked. "Sure," she replied. "Cola, if you have it." "I'll grab two," Jason said, heading to the kitchen. He returned with cold sodas and started the video. As the footage played, they watched in silence, both struggling to contain their emotions as they witnessed Karen and Greg engaging in various carnal acts. The subsequent pillow talk between them was even more heartbreaking. "What do you reckon our spouses are up to right now?" Karen asked, her voice teasing. "If I know Christy," Greg responded, "she's probably glued to one of her dull movies or nose-deep in one of her silly books." "Yeah, I get what you mean," Karen agreed. "I imagine Jason's buried in another one of his tedious spreadsheets or poring over stock reports." Greg chuckled. "You think he's out here saving the world or something? I mean, come on. His old man's company sells tires, for crying out loud. What's the big deal?" Karen laughed lightly. "So have you decided what you're going to tell that idiot after tomorrow's awards banquet?" "Yep," Greg said confidently. "I'll just say I was requested to stick around in Vegas for a week, filling in for the local reps. He'll swallow it. Hell, he'd believe anything I told him. I could tell him the moon's made of green cheese, and he'd buy it. By the time he catches on, We'll be lounging on a beach in Hawaii. Karen smiled. I can't wait to see you flaunting that new sling bikini you snagged. Christy erupted. Hawaii? She exclaimed, her voice rising. That idiot's whisking someone off to Hawaii? I'm going to rip his guts out. Turning to Jason, she said, Sorry for calling your wife a floozy. No need to apologize, Jason replied, his voice calm. I'd say the same thing. They refocused on the video, and Jason's heart broke further as he watched. So what about your anniversary? Greg asked. Are you just going to skip it? Hawaii sounds a lot more enticing than a night at a steakhouse. Karen sighed. I promised to make it up to him. Maybe I will. Maybe I won't. Greg smirked. You're ice cold. You know that? Karen shrugged. It's only our 10th anniversary, she said dismissively. There'll be more. Who cares about that right now? I need you. With those words, they resumed their activities, and Jason couldn't take it anymore. He hit the pause button. I've seen plenty, he said, his voice hoarse. Have you? Christy nodded, tears flowing down her cheeks. More than plenty, she affirmed, her voice breaking. Jason stood up, his heart heavy. I'm scheduling a meeting with a divorce attorney come Monday, he announced. Would you like to accompany me? Would you mind? Christy asked softly, her voice trembling. Not at all, Jason reassured her. Suddenly, Christy burst into tears, sobbing uncontrollably. Jason wrapped his arms around her, offering a comforting shoulder as she cried. Feeling the weight of their shared pain, Jason felt the weight of the emotions that had been building up for so long, and as Christy sobbed in his arms, he fought back tears of his own. In the midst of his turmoil, he still focused on consoling her. It was a strange irony. He had been betrayed by his wife, yet he found himself comforting another person who was in the same position, though with far more vulnerability. Would it bother you if I spent the night here? Christy asked softly, her voice full of hesitation. No hanky-panky, she clarified, giving him a small smile. I just want to cuddle. Jason was taken aback for a moment, but quickly found his composure. Of course, he said, his voice gentle. You're welcome to stay, as long as you like. Thank you, she whispered, her eyes glistening with the remnants of her tears. She looked away for a moment, still processing everything, and then quietly continued. I can't believe I wasted all those years on that idiot. All this time I've been falling for his lies. Jason nodded, deeply empathizing with her. I totally get it, he said, his voice low. He led her upstairs to the master bedroom, where he found an old t-shirt that seemed long enough for her to sleep in. She took it from him with a soft, appreciative smile before retreating to the bathroom to change. Jason changed into his pajamas and settled into bed, waiting for her return. When she finally emerged, he was almost taken aback by how different she looked. He had always admired Karen's legs, but Christy's were the slenderest he had ever seen. She slid under the covers with a smile, and Jason couldn't help but offer a quiet compliment. What's wrong? She asked, noticing the way he was looking at her. Never seen a woman's legs before? None as long as yours, Jason said, unable to resist the compliment. Christy laughed, teasing, Sweet talk will get you everywhere, sir. She snuggled closer to him, placing her hand on his chest. Jason wrapped his arm around her, savoring the warmth of her body against his. Did you know you're the only woman I've shared a bed with besides my wife for over 10 years? He confessed, his voice quiet but filled with the weight of his words. And you're the only man I've been with besides my husband, Christy replied softly, her voice tinged with sadness and realization. They lay there in silence for a moment, gazing into each other's eyes, both lost in their thoughts. Then, as if in sync, they drifted off to sleep in each other's arms. The next morning, they awoke tangled in each other's limbs. Good morning, sleepyhead, Christy greeted, her voice light and teasing. You don't need to rush out on my account, she added as Jason got up to use the bathroom. Good morning, beautiful, he responded, offering a tired but affectionate smile. I'll be quick. However, the trip to the bathroom proved more difficult than expected. Jason's state of arousal made it harder to relieve himself, but he finally managed. When he returned, He found Christy already tidying up the kitchen and preparing scrambled eggs and bacon. She looked completely at ease, despite everything that had happened in the past 24 hours. Glancing at the clock, Jason saw that it was 8:30 a.m. His gaze shifted back to Christy as she moved around the kitchen, still wearing his old t-shirt. For a moment, he couldn't help but reminisce about the times Karen used to make breakfast for him. "Wow, that smells amazing," he remarked, taking in the scent of the bacon wafting through the air. "I hope you don't mind me taking over your kitchen," Christy said, glancing over her shoulder at him. "Not at all," Jason assured her. "I can't recall the last time someone made me breakfast." "Karen never cooked for you?" she asked, her voice tinged with curiosity. "She used to," Jason replied, his tone heavy with the past. "But she stopped a while back. She claimed it took too much time and that she needed to prepare for her clients." "Damn," Christy muttered, the disappointment clear in her voice. "Exactly," Jason agreed, a deep sigh escaping him. The aroma of bacon filled the air as Christy placed a generous plate in front of him. Jason devoured the meal hungrily, as if he hadn't eaten in weeks. "Wow, that was amazing," he said, his voice full of appreciation. "Do you cook like this every morning?" "Whenever I can," Christy replied, her smile warm and genuine. Just as Jason was about to say something more, his phone rang, the name Jerry flashing on the screen. He answered, his voice calm. "Hey, Jerry, working Sundays now?" Jerry chuckled on the other end. "More often than I'd like," he admitted. "I wanted to update you. Your wife and her lover boarded their flight from Las Vegas just before 6 o'clock this morning. They had a layover in Los Angeles for about 40 minutes, and the plane departed an hour ago. They'll touch down in Honolulu in about 5 hours. I've got the flight details if you need them." "Got it," Jason confirmed, his voice tight with anger. "They're on American Airlines Flight 31. Jerry added, "I've got a contact in Honolulu ready to track them once they land." "Thanks, Jerry," Jason said, taking down the details. After ending the call, he turned to Christy. "Here's the update. They're on their way to Hawaii." Meanwhile, Karen settled into her seat as the plane ascended. She glanced out the window, watching as they flew over the vast Pacific Ocean. "This is it," she mused to herself, glancing at Greg, who was already asleep beside her. A brief pang of guilt swept over her, but she pushed it aside. Deep down, she knew this was just another in a long series of poor choices, but she justified it to herself, telling herself that everything would resolve without Jason ever finding out. She hoped their marriage would continue, that they'd grow old together and eventually retire peacefully. Karen's initial deception, telling Jason she couldn't conceive, had been a turning point. She had claimed medical issues, opting for a tubal ligation, but in reality, she had no desire for children. Later, complications with the IUD led her to use birth control pills, though she had resorted to other methods to avoid having to be intimate during peak fertility. The first pregnancy, followed by an abortion, had been concealed, and then the second one, with Greg, had been handled in the same way, all without Jason knowing. As Karen looked out the window, she remembered the many choices she had made. Choices that led her here, to this moment with Greg. She couldn't help but wonder if she would ever really face the consequences of her actions. But for now, she was content to live in her fantasy, justifying her betrayals and hoping her secret would remain buried forever. Karen's relationship with Greg had always been a stark contrast to her life with Jason. While Jason was methodical and planned every step of his life carefully, Greg was the complete opposite. He acted on impulse, living in the moment without concern for the future. Jason's life had been laid out for him. He was set to take over his father's tire business, eventually becoming CFO, then president, and perhaps CEO. Greg, on the other hand, had no clear direction. He embraced the uncertainty of life, never making plans beyond the present. Even in their intimate moments, their differences were glaring. Jason had always prioritized Karen's pleasure, making sure she was satisfied emotionally and physically. Greg, however, was more forceful, often leaving her feelings shattered in the wake of their encounters. Their initial meetings had taken place in discreet motels or houses that Greg was showing, but as their affair deepened, Karen became more paranoid about being spotted, both by Jason and by Greg's wife, Christy. After Jason voiced his concerns about their marriage, Karen tried to distance herself from Greg, focusing on her husband. But her resolve was short-lived. Greg sought her out, eager to reconcile, and although Karen feared Jason might discover their affair, she found it increasingly difficult to turn him away. To mitigate the risk, she made a bold decision to buy her own apartment, a private sanctuary where she and Greg could escape together without the fear of being caught. The purchase was made easier by their decision to file taxes separately, allowing her to maintain financial independence while still benefiting from tax breaks. It seemed like the perfect solution, a win-win situation that allowed her to continue her secret life with Greg. The culmination of these events led to her plan to spend a week in Hawaii with Greg, masking her absence as a vacation with her husband after their corporate meeting. Greg, as always, had informed his wife of his upcoming travels, and Karen confidently lied to Jason, telling him she was headed to Las Vegas for a week of work. She had no doubt he would believe her, as he always had. Although she regretted missing their 10th wedding anniversary, she assured herself that she would make it up to him when she returned. As she sat on the plane, staring out at the azure water below, she couldn't help but smile. The thought of Greg's gift, the daring bikini he had bought for their trip, stirred something inside her, a desire to indulge in the moment, to enjoy her time with him without the weight of her deceit hanging over her. Her thoughts briefly turned to Jason, and she half expected a message from him. His preference for face-to-face communication or calls didn't surprise her, but the idea of him still being in the dark about everything made her smile. A sudden change in the plane's engine pitch interrupted her thoughts. The plane began to dip slightly, and the noise shifted, a clear sign of turbulence. Panic rose within her, but she tried to brush it off until the plane dipped again, more sharply this time. Oxygen masks dropped from the ceiling, and passengers began to scream, their voices filled with terror. Karen felt the weight of the situation crash down on her as she realized what was happening. This is it, she thought, her heart pounding in her chest. We're going down. She grabbed her phone, hoping to make one last contact with Jason, but before she could do so, the plane descended quickly. She felt the pressure of gravity forcing her into her seat, and as the screams around her intensified, she made a final decision. She glanced at her phone, her last fleeting thought being Jason, and then the call abruptly ended. Meanwhile, Jason and Christy had just finished breakfast, the quiet of the morning offering a brief respite from the emotional chaos they were both experiencing. As they cleaned up and returned to the table to discuss their next steps, Jason admired Christy's analytical mind. He felt a closeness with her that had been absent in his marriage for months. His phone buzzed, and he looked down to see Karen's name flashing on the screen. His heart skipped a beat as he answered the call, putting it on speaker. Jace. Karen's voice was panicked, and in the background, Jason could hear the frantic shouts and clamor of a chaotic scene. Karen, what's happening? He asked, his voice strained as he tried to make sense of the noise. Plane down, Karen's voice crackled, barely audible over the chaos, before the call was cut off. Jason froze, his mind racing. Karen, he called into the phone, but all he heard was the beeping of the line disconnecting. He exchanged a look of shock with Christy, who had been sitting next to him. Jason tried to call Karen back, but it went straight to voicemail. Christy, you need to contact Greg, Jason said urgently, his hands shaking as he reached for his phone. Christy quickly retrieved her phone from her purse and dialed Greg's number. But just like with Karen, the call went unanswered, and her phone redirected to voicemail. Jason stood up, moving quickly toward his home office, his mind focused on finding out more. He powered up his computer and started searching for any information he could find. After a few minutes of unsuccessful attempts, he found the airline's contact number and dialed, hoping for any shred of useful information. At first, the airline staff refused to share details, but after persistent effort, Jason was able to speak with someone who confirmed they were investigating reports of the plane crash. They're looking into it, the representative said, their voice calm but distant. We'll keep you updated as soon as we know more. Jason hung up and turned to Christy. They're investigating the crash, he said, his voice low with worry. But we won't know anything for at least an hour. With no new information, they switched on the TV, hoping to catch any breaking news. Jason flipped through the channels, but there was nothing. The silence between them grew heavier with each passing minute. As time passed, Jason's anxiety mounted, and he tried to calm his thoughts. His phone buzzed again. A breaking news report flashed on the screen. A story about an American Airlines flight bound for Honolulu that had crashed in the Pacific Ocean. The details were sparse, but Jason's heart sank as he heard the words, "Flight down." "Oh God," Christy whispered, her voice filled with dread. The weight of the situation hit them both at once. The terror of the unknown, the uncertainty of whether Karen and Greg were alive, and the cold reality of the situation consumed them both. Christy's hand covered her mouth in shock as the reality of the news sank in. Jason wrapped his arms around her, holding her tightly, trying to comfort her even as his mind raced with fear and grief. Despite the strain in his marriage and the betrayal he had discovered, the thought of Karen perishing in that crash was unbearable. The years of history, the shared memories, all the complex emotions tied up in their relationship couldn't be dismissed so easily. He silently prayed for her safety, even as the anger and betrayal gnawed at his insides. An hour later, the phone rang, cutting through the heavy silence in the room. Jason muted the TV, his heart thumping in his chest as he answered the call. "Mr. Chandler?" a woman's voice asked. "Speaking," he replied, his voice shaky. "I'm calling to inform you that your wife's flight has crashed," she relayed, her tone flat and professional. "I have no further details at this time, but we will update you as soon as we learn more." "Thank you," Jason responded, his voice barely a whisper before he ended the call. He and Christy stood there in a moment of quiet, holding each other as tears welled in their eyes, the gravity of the situation settling on them both. Not long after, Christy's phone rang, and she answered quickly, bracing for the same grim news. Her face grew pale as she listened to the call, and when it ended, she shared the same details with Jason, her voice filled with disbelief. Soon after, Jason's phone rang again. It was his father. It wasn't unusual for his parents to reach out when they heard news like this, but hearing his father's voice now made the situation even more real. "Hey, Jace," his father greeted. "Hi, Dad. How are you?" Jason responded, trying to keep his voice steady. "Just got back from church," his father replied. "Did you see the news about the accident?" "Yes, I did," Jason confirmed, his voice heavy with emotion. "It's awful. By the way," his father continued, "how's Karen? Wasn't she on her way back from Vegas?" Jason's heart twisted. "She's not doing well, Dad," he replied, his words heavy with the weight of the truth. "She was on that plane that crashed." "What?" His father gasped in shock. "What was she doing going to Hawaii without you?" "She was with her boyfriend," Jason disclosed, his voice thick with a mixture of sorrow and anger. "Oh my God," his father whispered, the shock evident in his voice. "I'm so sorry to hear that, son. Take a week off and sort things out. Let Mike know if there's anything we can do. Just give me a call, okay?" "Okay. Thanks, Dad," Jason said gratefully, feeling a complex mix of emotions stir within him. He wrapped up the call, his mind swirling with the news. On one hand, there was the deep sorrow of knowing Karen was likely gone, but on the other, a bitter anger simmered inside him. Anger at her betrayal and at himself for not confronting her sooner. What troubled him most was the realization that, regardless of their marital issues, he was now responsible for Karen's final expenses, including the apartment. "Damn," Jason muttered under his breath, glancing at Christy. He wondered how she would cope with the news, what steps she would take moving forward. His mind began to form an idea, one that might help both of them. He approached her, his thoughts focused on the future. "Christy," he began, his voice steady despite the storm inside, "why not sell your apartment and move in here with me?" Christy looked up at him, her eyes brimming with tears. "Are you serious?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Absolutely," Jason affirmed, a sense of clarity settling over him. "There's a spare room upstairs, and with the challenges ahead, maybe we can support each other through it all." Christy considered this for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Why not?" she said softly, "but under one condition." "What's that?" Jason asked, intrigued. "That I share your bed," she said, her words causing his heart to skip a beat. Jason's thoughts raced, his mind spinning as he processed what she was suggesting. The speed of their connection felt intense, but something told him it was the right decision. He dismissed any lingering doubts and resolved to embrace the moment. "Sure," he said with a calm certainty. "It's been ages since I felt genuinely comfortable with my wife. Last night was the first time in years I felt fulfilled. Is that all right?" Christy asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "More than all right," Jason reassured her. "Then it's settled," Christy confirmed. "I'll grab my things from home and be back tonight." Jason nodded. "I'll be here," he promised. After Christy left to pack, Jason dialed Lucy's number, Karen's colleague, hoping to get more answers about Karen's trip to Hawaii. When Lucy answered, Jason wasted no time. "Hello, Lucy. It's Jason Chandler," he introduced himself. "Oh, hi, Jason," Lucy responded. "How's Hawaii?" Jason paused, not sure how to answer. "I'm not sure," he admitted. "I hear it's lovely this time of year." "Why?" Lucy's tone shifted, sensing something was off. "Karen mentioned you two were heading there after the company meeting." Jason felt his chest tighten. "Actually, Karen went, but not with me. She went with Greg." Lucy's surprise was evident. "What?" she exclaimed, taken aback. "That's right," Jason confirmed. However, neither of them made it. The plane they were on crashed in the Pacific Ocean today. You might have seen it in the news. "Oh no," Lucy gasped. "Do you know if she survived?" Jason's heart ached as he heard the genuine concern in Lucy's voice. He didn't have the answers. No one did. All he could offer was the truth that he had no idea what had happened to Karen, only that everything had changed in an instant. "I doubt any of them did," Jason responded solemnly, his voice full of quiet grief. "I'm deeply sorry," Lucy offered, her voice soft with sympathy. "Please accept my condolences. Also, the company has life insurance for all employees, and I'll handle the paperwork. But I'll need some details from the airline. Can you provide them?" "Yes, I'll gather what I can," Jason promised, his voice strained with exhaustion and sadness. Then, after a brief pause, he asked, "I have a question for you." "What's that?" Lucy inquired. "Were you aware of Karen's affair with Greg?" Jason asked, his voice tight with frustration and sorrow. "I had my suspicions," Lucy admitted. "There were whispers, but nothing concrete. We tend not to gossip about personal matters in the office." "I understand," Jason replied, his voice heavy with the weight of everything he had learned. "Well, that's all for now. I'll be in touch." "Thank you," Lucy responded, her voice sincere. "And again, my condolences." That evening, as Jason and Christy sat together watching television, a news report about the crash aired. The broadcast detailed the final moments of the plane's descent, saying that a crew member aboard a nearby cargo airliner had captured footage just miles from the crash site. The amateur video showed the plane descending rapidly, nose first. The plane appeared to disintegrate upon impact with the water. The report conveyed that the cargo ship had altered its course to assist in the search for survivors, but unfortunately, no one had survived. Several bodies were recovered from the water, though Karen and Greg's were not among them. Additionally, a significant amount of luggage had been retrieved, including items belonging to both Karen and Greg. The report made it clear that, tragically, there were no survivors from that flight. In the months that followed, Jason and Christy found themselves in a whirlwind of activity. Christy moved in with Jason, selling her own house and simplifying her life. Jason took charge of Karen's apartment, which held little value to him beyond the burden it represented. He donated everything inside to Goodwill, which gladly accepted the donations. Eventually, he sold the apartment and recouped Karen's original investment. Both Jason and Christy received a $500,000 insurance payout from Acme Real Estate for the loss of their spouses. With this money, they began the painstaking process of erasing Karen's presence from their lives. They discarded photos, stowed away knickknacks, and replaced furniture, especially the bed. Family members took what they wanted, and the rest, including 2 cars, was either sold, donated, or scrapped. Jason also navigated the tedious and emotionally draining task of closing Karen's bank accounts. After months of paperwork, he finally received a check for approximately $250,000. As time passed, Jason and Christy faced the aftermath of the plane crash, which had been caused by a series of misinterpretations and incorrect decisions made by the crew. The plane had descended at a rate of about 12,000 feet per minute, crashing into the water at roughly 135 miles per hour, a journey lasting just over 3 minutes. Jason imagined Karen's final moments, some of them spent on the phone with him, harrowing and painful. He believed her last act was one of regret, realizing that her life was ending in that very moment with no chance for escape. Yet, he couldn't help but feel that it was too little, too late. Fortunately, the airline reached a settlement with all affected families, compensating each passenger with just over $175,000. Jason and Christy's total payout came to over $1.6 million after accounting for taxes. Though they still had a substantial sum, neither Karen nor Greg's remains had been recovered, so no funeral took place. Instead, Jason and Christy organized memorial services for their families. They didn't shed tears for their deceased spouses. 3 months into her new life with Jason, Christy left her job to move in with him permanently. By then, they were deeply in love. One evening, while dining at a local Texas roadhouse, Jason proposed to Christy on one knee. The patrons around them cheered and applauded as Christy joyfully accepted. "It's high time you made an honest woman out of me," she whispered to him. "Why?" Jason asked, smiling. "Because you're going to be a father," she revealed, her voice filled with warmth and excitement. Overwhelmed with joy, Jason showered her with kisses. "I love you more than anything," he expressed, his voice full of emotion. "And I love you even more," she reciprocated, her eyes shining with love. "Just one request," she added softly. "What is it?" Jason asked, curious. "Please don't ask me to fly anywhere," she pleaded, a playful smile tugging at her lips. Jason laughed, pulling her close and embracing her tightly. "Don't worry, my dear," he assured her. "No more flying for you, I promise." This story raises questions about betrayal, loss, and the aftermath of tragedy. Jason's emotional struggle with his wife's affair and sudden death, coupled with Christy's journey of finding unexpected comfort, sparks discussion about trust, forgiveness, and moving on. The plane crash adds a layer of shock. How would you cope with such an event and the regret that follows? The ending also invites reflection. How do you rebuild after heartbreak, and what choices would you make in Jason and Christy's situation? Would you have handled things differently?